Hello and welcome to episode 8 of Crime Scene to Screen, a spin-off podcast from the main We Need to Talk About Movies podcast. And today we are joined by yet another guest as we go through our journey into the macabre and how it relates to the big screen. But anyway, before we get into it, let me introduce my co-presenter first, the lovely Therese Ray. Good evening, Therese.
Good evening, Joseph. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. And yes, I suppose we should introduce our wee mystery guest as well. So, good evening, Darren.
Good evening, Joe. Good evening, Therese. How are you both
It
doing?
is
Thanks for having me on.
the
really
Darren
should-
Vincent.
Yes,
Yeah.
I should have said it is Darren Vincent, our very own Darren Vincent, the storyteller master from BanterFlix. See, this is why I'm not a great presenter when it comes to these things. But anyway, we're here tonight because Darren decided that he wanted to discuss the 2010 film by, I think it's Andrew Jarecki, All Good Things, which is loosely based on the life and times of Robert Durst. So, Darren, why did you just pick this particular case, by the way?
Well, it's one of those films where I actually learnt about it through the 2015 documentary The Jinx, which was on HBO or Sky Atlantic over here. And it's just one of those cases that's just been really fascinating for me. And when you watch The Jinx, you learn that the director of the documentary also directed a film loosely based on the events of the case, and it never really took off as much as the documentary. But you will find that they both interlink, and as you'll find as we go through the case, that the film plays a part and the documentary actually plays a part as well in the case. So I just thought it was a very interesting one where that sort of movie and sort of crime merge and actually influence the case going forward. But a bit like the main guy as well, I live a very complicated, reclusive life, much like Robert Durst, so I think I see a bit of him in myself, but sure, I'll let you guys delve into it and see what you guys think too.
Well, you definitely did pick an interesting case, to say the least, and I don't think you'll want to be comparing yourself too much to Isle Bobby once we actually get into the case. But anyway, I think the best way just to actually just move on with things is to actually just dive into it head first. So, Robert Durst is an American real estate heir and suspected serial killer and the older brother of Douglas Durst, who is the head of the Durst organization in New York City. He is suspected of having murdered 3 people: his first wife, Kathleen McCormick, who disappeared in 1982, Susan Berman, his longtime friend who was killed in Los Angeles in the year 2000, and his neighbour Morris Black, who was killed in Texas in 2001. So before we get into those actual specific crimes, as usual, we'll just get into a bit of background information on Bobby and try and sort of discover from this here, how he became the man he is suspected of being, I should say. So, Robert was born into a family of 4 children with his mother and father. He's the eldest of the 4 children, and their family was Jewish. And on April 12th, 1943, he was born, and they grew up in Scarsdale, New York. His father, Seymour Durst, was a highly successful real estate investor for the Durst organization, which was founded by Robert's grandfather as far back as 1927. The first sort of incident that sort of helped shape who he would become happened when he was 7 years old, when he witnessed the death of his mother, who'd fallen off the roof of the family home in Scarsdale in mysterious circumstances. He claims to have seen her on the roof alongside his father, but his brother Douglas denied the claim, and the two of them underwent counselling at a young age for their sibling rivalry, as well as Robert specifically for having witnessed such a horrific thing at his young age. And in 1953, a psychiatrist report on 10-year-old Robert mentioned how he had personality decomposition and possibly even schizophrenia, which is actually very important when you look at some of the events later on in life for Robert, as this here sort of information plays a key role in that later. So, as a teenager, Robert was described as being a bit of a loner by his high school classmates. He attended Lehigh University, where he got a degree in economics in 1965. He enrolled in a doctoral program at the University of California, Los Angeles later that year, where he met Susan Berman, but eventually withdrew from the school and returned to New York in 1969. And eventually, Robert would fall in line with the sort of family business and became a real estate developer within the Durst organisation. However, his brother Douglas was appointed as head of the business in 1992, and it led to a huge rift between Robert and his family, which eventually led to him suing his family for a share of their fortune. So, as you can see, at a young age, Robert is, fairly reclusive sort of character, keeps to himself. Like I said, it all sort of stems from the incident in which his mother had died under those mysterious circumstances after falling from the roof. So you can see the sort of early stages of this man who's sort of to himself and mysterious and somewhat unpredictable as well. And we'll sort of see that unpredictability sort of grow as Therese is going to get into the next part when the Kathleen comes into his life.
So as you can see, Robert Durst had a wonderful childhood. Darren, I don't really know if you would still be sort of relating to him after hearing all of this.
Well, yeah, yes and no. The one thing that strikes me about that is the mother on the roof scenario. Like, these people have thousands, millions maybe of dollars, and yet the mum is still rolling up her sleeves and jumping on the roof to maybe clear the gutter in or something like that. We'll never know, but there's something really suspect about that, but absolutely shocking. Something like that happened to you in childhood. You can imagine it's really gonna mess with your head if not properly counselled, or you given the right type of therapy as a child. But we'll see how it turns for Robert as we go.
Yeah, it can either go one of two ways. He can excel and be a really successful businessman with a great life, or he can take shape in the way that he does as we continue on. So as Joe touched upon, there's sort of three pivotal suspicions that Robert Durst has been brought up about in the past. And I'm just going to kickstart with the disappearance and the story, I suppose, that circulates around his first wife, Kathleen McCormick Durst. And I'm making sure they include her surname because I know her family who would definitely not be too happy with us including his surname in all of this. But like always, it's good to give a bit of background even for the victims as well, because you tend to find that they're not really as mentioned as the perpetrators. But Kathleen Kathy McCormick Durst was born on the 15th of June 1952 to her parents and four other siblings. So not much can really be said about Kathy's early life. It did seem that she had a normal childhood, but it was believed that her father had died when she was quite young, and was raised then by her mother and her siblings, all of which I would say appeared quite close with each other, given the experiences they had with their father, and sort of, being there for their mother through any sort of issues that they had. She was quite a studious person. She attended and graduated high school. When she graduated, she trained as a dental nurse, and had moved out on her own to a building that, funny enough, was actually owned by the Durst organisation. And this is apparently how her and Robert met in the fall of 1971. So in the film, the two protagonists, they're not exclusively named Robert Durst and Kathy McCormick, but Ryan Gosling and Kirsten Dunst, you see a scene that they meet basically over a burst pipe, and it sort of comes across as like a real romanticized meet cute, and I don't know if that was, I suppose, a point of the director to set up a somewhat sort of happy story between the two, but it's hinted at that their meeting was quite when they're bonding over something in the house. But things quickly sped up for the couple. They'd went on 2 dates together, and directly after those, Durst invited McCormick to move in with him at his home in Vermont, where they both opened a food health store, which in the 70s, I don't understand if that was, the real kick. I know everybody loves Holland and Barrett at the minute, but I'm not too sure if they were all into their food health at the time. But that business was short-lived, because Robert received mounting pressure from his father to return to New York, to which both he and Kathy did. And they married then on the 12th of April, 1973, which was Robert's 30th birthday. Things sort of took not a great turn. In the initial stages, their marriage was quite romantic. They were in the honeymoon stage. Kathy was seen to be enjoying sort of the higher life, living with Robert and his family, who did come from considerable amount of money. But Kathy still maintained that she was going to focus on her studies and continue to pursue her education as well, because it was quite important to her. But not too long after, basically, the couple's relationship did start to sort of dwindle and falter. And over the years, Kathy was seen by family and friends to be covered in bruises, have different accidents, sort of different things were covered up with, making excuses of, it was just a wee fight or something, she had fell down a stairs or something like that. And rumours had started to spread that she was suffering from domestic abuse at the hands of Durst. But nobody really ever done anything at the time. Then in January 1982, Kathy was very close to finishing her degree to become a paediatrician. So as I said, she was really continuing to pursue her career. But shortly before finishing her degree, she disappeared after attending a house party thrown by her friend Gilbert Najemi. People at the party made comments at how she was very casually dressed. She seemed really detached. Being casually dressed was far from her normal sort of outfits that she would wear. So people did sort of question it. And she sort of kept herself to herself. She didn't stay long. And after a phone call from Robert, she shortly left the party to head to her marital home in South Salem in New York. It was said that when they got to the home, both Robert and Kathy had got into a heated argument, which led to suspected violence toward Kathy. But Robert Durst was adamant that he then put McCormick on a train to Manhattan, and later spoke to her that evening when she arrived at their apartment. So he admitted that they had had a fight, but he made sure that she had got back into the apartment. And they basically spoke to each other. Robert Durst later told the filmmakers of the Jinx that he had hoped that, I suppose, putting her on the train and sort of putting everything away would make everything go away. At the time, people didn't really know what that meant. But as we continue on, people have their own suspicions. But unfortunately for Durst, nothing went away, really. So suspicions began, I suppose, when Kathy failed to meet up with her friend Gilbert, whose party she had attended the day before. And he was already sort of concerned about her anyway because of how she had appeared at the party. So when she didn't turn up, he then phoned the police multiple times, raised an issue that Kathy hadn't turned up. The police at the time didn't really take much side of it, really. That was until Robert himself filed a missing persons report later in the week. Despite some people having seen Kathy, for example, the I don't even know the American word for it, but I'm going to call it receptionist. So the receptionist at the apartment where they lived in New York had said that they had seen someone from behind who had looked like Kathy. And there was a few other people who had also said they'd seen her, but they had never seen her from her front profile. It was either from the back or the side. So it couldn't be completely clear if it was Kathy or not. But the police were sort of concerned with the conflicting information that Robert had brought forward and what other people had said. When he had reported it then, and as more people sort of found out that the Kathy had been missing, the sort of stories and the questions about the previous bruises that they'd seen on Kathy, the conversation had started again. Because people started asking questions about their relationship prior to Kathy going missing. And it was said that there was notes within the hospital that she had been treated for severe facial bruising 3 weeks before she went missing. So, these sort of things coming together within a police report, and I suppose as a profile, isn't going to look really good for Robert, really. At the same time, when all of this animosity was going on, it had also come to light that Kathy had asked for a divorce, a simple settlement with Robert. But instead of basically accepting this, he completely cut off all of her financial ties and basically left her penniless and extremely desperate. And all of the while, he was off having an affair with a woman called Prudence Farrell, who was the sister of actress Mia Farrow. So all this is going on. It's quite traumatic. And yet, Robert Durst actively, from this standpoint, doesn't really give a shit because he's off having an affair. So after Kathy had went missing, police had interviewed Robert Durst, who claimed that he had last spoken to her when she called him at their Riverside apartment. His claims were basically that the last time I had seen her was at the Katona station where he had dropped her off. She was due to get on the 9:15 train to Manhattan. And as far as he was aware, she got on the train because they spoke to each other later that night. He also claimed as well that a few days later, a supervisor at Kathy's medical school called him and said that she had actually phoned in sick to the university, the medical school, and that she had also been absent from class for the entire week. So it sort of sounded like he was building a somewhat alibi. And it also came out that it was uncertain if it was actually Kathy who had made the phone call, as the voice didn't really sound like hers. The police continued to interview Robert Durst, but they sort of had their own suspicions because so much of his stories, that while he had answers for everything, a lot of them contradicted what he was really saying. So effectively, Kathy's disappearance, went dead, which is extremely unfortunate. And 8 years later, Durst legally divorced her and claimed spousal abandonment, which I'm sorry is just a dick move. In 2016, the McCormick family asked to have Kathleen declared legally dead. They basically wanted to have some sort of memorial put in place for Kathy, because they weren't really allowed to, I suppose, both lay her to rest and lay the ordeal to rest, which was granted the following year. While this was going on, Kathleen's mother, Anne McCormick, attempted to sue Durst for $100 million, alleging that Robert had killed her daughter and deprived them of the right to bury her. But as you can imagine, Robert Durst, coming from a very wealthy family, was able to quash that sort of accusation pretty quick. Unfortunately, both of McCormick's parents are now dead. Her family, her sisters and her brothers, continue to sort of fight for the right to reopen her investigation, which came around in 1999. And they searched Robert's former South Salem residence for the first time. The investigation then became public in November 2000. So even at the beginning, when Kathy had went missing, the police didn't actually even search the house, either the apartment or the house where they both lived. So there was great misdemeanors and inconsistencies in the investigation from the get-go. In August 2019, a wrongful death lawsuit filed by McCormick's other sister, Carol, accused him of murdering his wife, was dismissed on the grounds that she had waited too long to file the suit. So there is I've completely forgot about the law, but there is a law, and I will remember and come back.
Statute of limitations, is it?
The statute of limitations. There's my sleuth sister jumping in. Effectively, there was too long time between the disappearance and the lawsuit had filed, which was just extremely unfortunate. Because, you know, given everything that went on, there was so much evidence, they should have been able to reopen the case at the time, but they unfortunately didn't. Up until now, thank God, on the 17th of May, 2021, Westchester County, New York District Attorney Mimi Russia had said that the disappearance of Kathy McCormick Durst had been reclassified as a murder and would be reinvestigated. So as we continue on, we will find out that there is a trial ongoing at the minute. At present, it isn't really in connection with Kathy's disappearance, unfortunately, but hopefully with the news that this has been reopened, they will start investigating and possibly try Robert for the unfortunate disappearance, and I would also suspect murder of Kathy. So while that was quite a long ramble, we're going to go for another 2 very long rambles because this whole case is just absolutely mental. But before we go on, Darren, what do you think, I suppose, about Kathy's disappearance, first of all? So it was maybe not so much focusing on the film, but seeing the story and hearing the sort of what happened effectively. You know, do you believe Robert Durst? What are your sort of ideas?
Well, this, you know, we're really just 2 parts of the story, and you can begin to see why the documentary was called The Jinx. Is this man just that unlucky that everything that keeps happening to him, like with his mother and with Kathy? Is it just a case of complete misfortune, or is there a reason behind those things? Not saying he had anything to do with his mother, but, you know, things like this where he's just, it seems to be all falling nicely for him. He's, you know, getting, you know, the luck with the statute of limitations type thing, and it's really setting him up to think, you know, I'm getting away with stuff like this. This is setting a precedent for me going forward. And am I really that wealthy and rich that I can walk stuff like this? And you sort of think, is he, you know, a man who's really unfortunate, or is he just, you know, chanced his luck the whole time?
Yeah, pretty much. He's, you know, like, you think it's bad now, just wait till you move further on. Yeah. Especially when it comes to the third case. But yeah, he's just someone who's constantly, you know, A, rode his luck, B, relied on his fortune, and C, relied on the incompetency of you know, the law enforcement who were tasked in order to try and, you know, investigate this stuff. It's just incredible the amount of stuff that he got away with as well. And one thing I don't think you mentioned, Therese, was how it was only he initially offered a reward for Kathleen's someone fined Kathleen. I think it was $100,000, but within 3 weeks he reduced it down to $15,000.
Yeah.
And shortly after that as well, neighbours and that started noticing taking like Kathleen's stuff out of their apartment in garbage bags and just dumping it, as if to say, alright, she's gone now, right, that's it, big clear out, lovely, see you now, right, but I'm still looking for her, I don't know, I promise I'm still looking for her, you know. So that doesn't help suspicions, let's just put it that way, you know.
No.
That's like one of them cash out bets on Paddy Power, and you put a stake on and they give you an hour. Go, hang on, I was meant to put 15,000 on this bet that my beloved wife would show up. I'll cut that down.
And put it this way,
Cut my losses.
Yeah, it's not as if he couldn't cover the 100,000 either. Let's put it that way. Given that he's from one of the richest families in New York, but we'll move on, and I'll take it up from the point of the homicide of Susan Berman. So as we mentioned before, Susan Berman was a long-time friend of Robert. They'd met in high school. Her father, funny enough, was David Berman, and he was a reputed gangster who in the late 1940s had operated in the Flamingo Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas, Nevada. But on Christmas Eve in the year 2000, she had been found dead. Found murdered execution style in her home in Benedict Canyon. It is thought that she was murdered because she was doing an investigative piece in on the mob. So initially everyone thought, it's the mafia's involved. She dug too deep. She dug around where she shouldn't have and stuff like that there. So it seemed like an open and shut case in regards to that. But the fact that she's linked to Robert as well, and a few other factors, sort of indicate, well, it's not as cut and dry as that. So a few days after the incident in which she was found dead, Beverly Hills Police Department had received a handwritten note which was postmarked on December 23rd, and it contained Berman's address and the word cadaver. Now Durst around this time had been known to have been in the Northern California area days before she was found dead. And the day before her body was found, he had flown back to New York. So that's very loose and tenuous in terms of connecting him to the crime. But at the same time, his involvement with her crime comes into play a bit later on in the whole narrative overall. But the actual, the reason why Durst was suspected in the case, it stemmed from a $50,000 payment that he had made to Berman in 2 installments. He confirmed to the LAPD that he'd made the installments of that he'd made a payment of $25,000, but he declined to be questioned about the murder itself. So obviously, apart that again, that's sort of loose and tenuous evidence. He just gave her a loan and that's it. Can you really say that he killed her over that there? Yes, no, maybe. But again, this stuff will come to light later. And in the 2005 deposition, Durst had confirmed that the LAPD wanted to speak to him again. He wanted to speak to Berman in relation to Kathy McCormick's disappearance shortly before her death, but a case study note from the Guardian cast doubt over the claim. Around the time that sort of the walls started closing in again on Robert in relation to this here, and the fact that he was being sort of questioned again and again in relation to Berman's case, he went into hiding in Galveston, Texas, and even to the, as the film itself, all good things points out, he started dressing as a woman to try and avoid detection, and he received a tip off that the investigation of McCormick's murder had been reopened, so he planned for a life as a fugitive as well. And Berman's biographer Kathy Scott believes Durst murdered Berman as she may have known too much about the disappearance of Kathy McCormick, and you can see how that was dramatised in All Good Things. She constantly wanted to get in touch with Robert, but he kept ignoring her calls, and then she kept threatening him, so you could say that he snapped and he decided to pay her a visit around Christmas time, and that led to her execution by a gunshot wound to the back of the head. But again, it's one of those things, when it comes to this particular end of things, it's, the links are tenuous, but I don't think it's as clear cut as, say, the likes of the first instance, and then obviously the third instance there with Morris Black, which will come into play later. But sort of with that Berman end of things, what do you think about that, Darren? Do you think Robert had really a link to that there, or do you think it's merely just coincidental?
Who knows at this stage? I don't even think Robert knows at this point. And we're sort of, telling that sort of section, you start to see the sort of split personality perhaps of him, where he is dressing. I heard reports that when he was dressing as a woman to hide, he was acting mute. So maybe that's not just a cover. Maybe that's some sort of personality trait. Maybe there is an issue with Berman where maybe she knew something that he didn't want anybody to know. Who knows? He's just one of those characters where you'd maybe just love like a truth serum or something, or some sort of like, you'd just love to get him drunk to hear what he really thinks and be able to tell you the full story. But it's everything falling into place for him, and we get to see, we see that in the Jinx as well. The thing I wanted to touch on as well was in all good things, when he is dressing, he's not very convincing as a woman in some of those scenes. As we know, it's Ryan Gosling, but I'd say he would pull off that look better in real life, because he is very timid, and he apparently wasn't speaking. But the whole Berman thing, no idea.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, it could touch into that schizophrenia he was sort of diagnosed with as a child. But again, I think that's the most tenuous out of the three incidents, of him being linked to any sort of murder or foul play. The Berman case is one of those ones that I'm kind of going, maybe that was a coincidence, whereas the other two I think are a lot more concrete and going, yes, he was definitely involved in them. Well, and we'll find out about that third one now, because I think you're going to take it from here, Therese, and talk about Lovely Morris.
I am indeed, and God love Lovely Morris. He was a fairly innocent man caught up in a fairly mental web. But yes, as you touched upon, the fact that Robert Durst admitted that he had fled this summer and went into hiding in Galveston, Texas, as well, screams quite a lot of red flags. Like, a man who has protested his innocence for so long is all of a sudden hiding and pretending to be a woman. And as Darren, you said too, he's coming across as mute. So unless that's just part of his personality, but to me, there is a lot of red flags. But while Durst was living in Texas, he had struck up an unlikely friendship with his elderly neighbour, a man called Morris Black, who had also lived most of his life as a recluse. So initially it was sort of deemed that Robert didn't really talk to Morris at all. He was sort of pretending to be a woman as well as mute. And then as time went on, they sort of, it was like a mutual understanding of how they both wanted to remain in the background effectively. And it was said that Durst had revealed to Morris that he wasn't actually a woman, and that he had gone to Texas to start a new life. And it was due to certain dealings in his past. So he didn't really go into details as to why, what the dealings in his past were. He sort of just kept it as that he had things to escape from. And Morris, I suppose, as you can see in the movie, the actor that plays Morris and the character, they sort of had that mutual understanding that, he mentioned that he also has spent his life sort of on the run. So they, as I said, they had this mutual understanding, and they both kept it themselves. So then on the 9th of October in 2001, Durst was arrested at the home in connection to a bag of body parts that was found in Galveston Bay, which in turn were the remains of Morris Black. Durst was released on the next day on bail, as you can imagine, because he's a multi-millionaire and can afford it, but missed a court hearing on the 16th of October. And while he was still on bail and on probation, a warrant was let out for his arrest for jumping his bail agreement. So it was effectively a wanted man for jumping out on the court hearing, which again, if you're someone who has been testing your innocence, saying that you haven't done anything wrong, and then you effectively skip your trial. You're not doing yourself any favors. But in 2003, Durst was put on trial for the murder of Morris Black, which he admitted to killing. But he claimed that he had killed the man as a matter of self-defense. Durst claimed that he and Black had got into a fight. He had called him a cranky and confrontational loner. And while they were in the fight, a gun appeared, a 22 caliber target pistol to be exact. But they struggled for control of Durst's gun, which is the target pistol that he owned, after Black grabbed it from its hiding place and threatened him with it. During the struggle then, apparently, according to Robert Durst, the pistol discharged and it shot Black in the face. Durst then decided that he had to get rid of the body, and specifically in the way that he did get rid of it. Again, a lot of suspicion, but he said that he needed to get rid of the body because no one would believe him, a man who was accused of murdering his wife, murdering his best friend, and the disappearance of his wife, would shoot someone in self-defense. So for some reason, Robert Durst thought it would be a good idea to dissect Morris Black and put his body parts into black bin bags. During cross-examination in the trial, Durst admitted to using a paring knife, 2 saws, and an axe to dismember Black's body before bagging and dumping his remains in Galveston Bay. As a result of lack of forensics, the jury acquitted Durst of murder on the 11th of November 2003, which is absolutely hard to believe. It's crazy. He was sentenced in 2004 for 2 counts of bail jumping and evidence tampering, and this was in relation to the dismemberment of Black's body. But he was granted parole, which in turn he further broke and was taken back to jail when he was then eventually released on the 1st of March 2006. So, he commits this crime, commits it in a point of self-defense, dismembers a body, somehow gets away with it to the fact that the jury went in as sort of favour to say that it was self-defense, and due to everything else going on in his life, they sort of just disregarded the dismemberment piece altogether. But in turn, he was actually sentenced for jumping bail and evidence tampering, which is just, it's completely hard to believe that the judicial system would not sort of prosecute him for what happened to Morris Black. And to me, I think we all have our own opinions. I am very confident that Robert Durst had major parts to play in every single one of these disappearances and murders. But, to openly admit what he did in this and to somehow get away with it. I think in this case, he's not so much a jinx, but he's extremely lucky. And while we talk about the jinx, we then move on to the subject of both the film and the TV show, which, as Darren, you touched upon earlier, play quite a big part in the overall trial and sentencing as well. So, Joe, if you want to take it away.
Yeah, this is where sort of things come to a head again for Robert and sort of close and sit where they are now. Right, up to this stage, like you said, Robert's been sort of, a jinx onto all these different people he's been involved with through either his own hand or some strange sort of coincidence or circumstance. But the fact he's managed to evade, blame in the eyes of the law for these 3 incidences is astonishing. So you would think at this stage of your life, okay, I've got away with this, that's me. But does Robert think that? Of course he doesn't. in 2015, he decided to take part in a HBO documentary, The Jinx, which was actually directed by the same director of All Good Things, Andrew Jarecki, I believe his name is. And in the documentary himself, he discussed the disappearance of Kathleen McCormick, Susan Berman's death, and Morris Black's death against the advice of his lawyers. So essentially, he's reopening all these old wounds again and just incriminating himself further in these crimes potentially. But there's one important thing to sort of note. When he was being investigated, they couldn't really communicate with him and get across ideas to him. They found it very difficult, so they didn't understand what was going on, so they hired a psychiatrist, and that psychiatrist examined him, and they found out that he had Asperger's syndrome, as he was diagnosed with it at that point. So that may play a role into why he, his actions and why he may have done what he's done. But I'm not saying at all that, Asperger's syndrome is to blame for these things, because obviously, there's countless people with the condition, and I'm not trying to sort of, put them in an equivalency with Robert. But they say it potentially could have played a role into why he was acting the way he was. But, as a result of his participation in that documentary, the FBI arrested him in New Orleans on the same day the final episode was broadcast, due to a letter from Durst to Berman that was handed over to the filmmakers in the research of their documentary, as there were links between the handwriting Robert had at during the documentary. He proved his handwriting next to the handwriting of this note that was handed to that was on this letter that was handed to Berman. So that sort of incriminated him. That was the thing that went, okay, we can reopen this case and we can sort of look into Robert to see his involvement into it. So as of now, sort of the way things are sitting, in 2016 he was transferred to California, and in 2018 a judge ruled that there was sufficient evidence for him to be tried for the death of Berman, and that trial had begun on the 2nd of March 2020, but was postponed after 6 days due to the COVID outbreak, and after additional delays the trial resumed on May 17th 2021. But also around this time as well, Robert had been suffering from poor health conditions as well, which delayed it further also. So on May, this is the latest information, but this thing's ongoing. Like, by the time we even release this recording, we could get an outcome of this case. It's just one of those things. But also on that date, the 17th of May 2021, the West Chester County District Attorney said that the disappearance of Kathleen McCormick Durst had been reclassified as a murder and would also be reinvestigated, and that trial is still continuing to this day as well. So, like I said, at the end of the day, he was a jinx to himself there, because he'd gotten away with 3 separate sort of investigations, and then he decided to go, well, I'll sort of try and clear my name again, and no, you just made it 100 times worse. So that's the way things have gone for Bobby Durst, and that's where things are sitting for him right now. So what do you think, Darren? If you were accused of a murder, and you may have done it, but you were cleared in the eyes of the law, but there are still little pieces of evidence that you know about that nobody else really sort of knows about, would you take part in a spotlight investigation for BBC Two?
Well, it's one of those sort of, it touches upon in the Jinx. It's almost like he likes to see how far he can push it and see how much he can get away with. Like, he's almost like, it's the thrill, or he's maybe proud of what he's done and what he's got away with so far. That when they caught him, when he jumped bail, he paid it. First of all, I want to go back and say his bail that he paid was $300,000 to get him out, before being caught in the supermarket for shoplifting, and then he was caught with like $50,000 in his pocket or in his car. So it's like, where are these sums of money coming from, and how that money, he's just doing, it almost seems like he's doing stuff for the thrill to see if he get away with it. And what I did read in the notes is that he actually contacted Andrew Jarecki after all good things that came out to say, yes, I really enjoyed your film and I'd love to be part of the Jinx. So it was him that reached out to Andrew Jarecki and said, I'd love to sit down with you and have a proper interview and tell you my side of the story. But could it be a sign of his age? Like the guy's getting on a bit. He's maybe beginning to slip up, and maybe the guilt is getting to him where he's starting to feed stuff out. But if he just had kept quiet and just appreciated the film for, you know, the 5 out of 10 film that we both think it is, he would.
Five's generous.
Yeah,
but no, we're going to get in that. We're going to get in that. Don't worry.
He would be done. So yeah, but yeah, absolutely terrifying that someone has that much information that they're not giving, and you know that it takes a coincidence like that to get this man back on the dock for trial.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it is incredible. Like I said, I don't even think it's old age in the sense of, you know, feeling guilt. Because if he felt guilt, he would openly admit it, and he'd go, "Yes, I did this. Yes, I did that. I am taking." But he just has this idea of going, "Maybe I did it, or did I do it? No, I didn't do it." He's like, it's a little tease with it, and you're like, "For frick's sake, Robert, will you just admit, did you do this or not, so we can give some peace to these bloody families once and for all, because it's so unfair what he's doing." It is just an absolutely wild case, and you know, as we'll go into the film doesn't even touch the tip of the iceberg when it comes to this actual case. Like, I think the Jinx, compared to it, does a whole lot more justice. But like I said, we're going to get in that. But what do you think of Robert Therese and where things are sitting now for him?
I mean, in no way can you be a favour of this man. I've openly said that I think he's suspicious of every single thing. I would also go far to say that I wouldn't say that this is the only 3 that he's ever done or has been involved in. The family themselves, you know, I agree that the film doesn't touch everything. You know, upon research, yes, this is mostly focusing on Robert Durst, but the family themselves are extremely corrupt. You know, given all the sort of publicity and everything that went on with Robert, his family did pay off quite a lot of people, and you know, to keep things quiet. And even with the controversies of Robert, the family were still able to obtain like one of the biggest reconstruction buildings in the world, which is, you know, the project of the World Trade Center. You know, that the Durst organization effectively built and paid for that. You know, so it just goes to say that no matter what you've done in your life, if you have money, then it just goes away. I think in terms of Robert reaching out to Andrew Jarecki, I don't think it was a case of him being sort of naive. I think in reality, in the back of his mind, he's got away with things for so long. Yes, he has been sentenced and he has been in and out of jail, but as we touched upon, they were for such menial things. He probably thought that, you know, doing the Jinx would work in his favor. You know, if he's going to come out and sort of spill all the dirty secrets off the back of a film that, you know, as we've all discussed, really wasn't that great. I would say for a short period of time, he probably felt like a celebrity. You know, the fact that a director like that made a film about him, he probably thought, well, you know, I must be like a celebrity now. You know, everybody has their own documentary. And, you know, as we'll talk about, suppose touch upon the documentary as well, it did him no favours at all. You know, it didn't make him look like a celebrity. It made him look like an absolute mental patient. So yeah, he's an extremely eccentric, weird man who, I'd say, thanks to his name and the legacy of his father and his grandfather, has just been able to get away with things for so long. Thankfully, now there is an ongoing trial, but as you touched upon as well, Joe, much like the Golden State Killer, these men are so old now that, you know, even if they are sentenced, they're not going to spend any amount of time in jail that they should. You can see videos of Robert Durst's trial. It's posted on YouTube effectively every day. And whether or not he's putting it on, we don't know. But he just looks frail and ruined and run down. So yes, it's good that, you know, certain families are finally getting the justice they deserve. Well, hopefully they do as the trial is ongoing. It's just sad to think that they might not see out things to the very end. But from one depressing situation to another, shall we talk about all good things?
Do we have to?
I think we do.
I know that's the whole point of this podcast. We have to talk about the film after the incident. You know what? You know, I thought maybe with, you know, when we did Silent Night, Deadly Night as part of, you know, our look into the Covina Massacre, I thought maybe that's the worst film we covered. But you know what? See, that film, at least it was entertaining. At least I got some sort of enjoyment out of it for what it was. This here? Nah. But anyway, that's why we're here today, to talk about the 2010 Andrew Jarecki film, which looks into the life and times of Robert Durst. Only he's not called Robert Durst in this here, he just goes by a different name.
David May,
that's,
I think it is.
Mark something. See, that's mean. I only watched it last night. Is that bloody dull? But
David, I know it's David at least.
Yeah, but yes, so that's what we're here to talk about, that film in particular. So we're going to pass it over to you, Darren, since you decided to pick this monstrosity. And we want to really hear, you know, sort of, and we sort of know why you picked it, because, you know, you had your fascination with the Jinx and that there. But we want to really just get, you know, your general thoughts on the film. So take it away, Darren.
Well, you're looking at me to give the verdict on it, so I'm thinking maybe I should give the review as if it's a Robert Durst court case, right? So we'll look at both sides of the argument. So yes, I struggling to actually find the merits of this, but I'm going to say that this film is not a bad film. It's just an accident. The whole 2 hours of the film is just a really, really horribly directed and badly written accident from start to finish. So it's all good. But yeah, no, I had never seen the film until I started doing the research for this pod. So I knew a lot about the case, obviously watching the Jinx and sort of following it through, and I was like, I'll check this out. So first of all, the biggest shock is that Ryan Gosling is actually playing Robert Durst, well, whatever he's called in the film. And you don't really get a sense of a lot of the story of the case, or where it's going to, or where it's going. You know, there's so many great elements to this story. The whole rivalry with the brother. They throw in that his dad is very dominating in this. He doesn't let him have the relationship with Kirsten Dunst at the start. I don't know if that's ever touched on in any of the real life cases. There's also that whole deep understory, as well as the dad, or the empire of sort of buildings they rent out is run by, like, you know, porn houses, pimps, all stuff like that. So there's a whole sort of gritty backstory to where they get their money from, and they barely touch on it. They almost act as if it's the most, you know, he's going around and collecting the money, but it's very normal. It's just like, it's like a paper round for him. So you don't really get that sense of, you know, how this man came to be, and the character on screen doesn't portray the one you see in the courtroom. It's almost like the real life one is more interesting than the one that they've polished up and put on screen. About halfway through, I zoned out. I was just hoping that something would jump out at me and make this film, you know, give it some merit to say, oh yeah, if you like that case, you should go check out this film. But I didn't find any redeeming qualities for it. Kirsten Dunst is very good in it. She plays this sort of Kathy character, and she is traumatized. But we don't, much like in real life, we don't have a resolution to that story. I felt that kind of dissipated out with about half an hour to go. But what did you guys think? Was there anything I didn't miss, or did I just block it out and ignore the horribleness that was All Good Things?
Well, for me, like, whenever it comes to these podcasts, I tend to try and watch film as close as possible as to whenever we're going to do it, just so it's fresh in my head, I'm ready to go. I'm very lucky I watched this last night, because even like trying to remember, Ryan Gosling's actual name in this film, like I've just pulled it up while you were talking there, it's actually David Marks. I could not for the life of me remember that. The name itself is just very bland and boring, just as the way the character is itself. I will say this about Gosling, he does get that sort of timid side of Robert across a little bit, but it's not enough. He still feel he's miscast in the role. There'd be plenty of other actors who could sort of pull that off, and at least have some sort of subtlety within them. This show, at least, that there's a sinister side to him. In this here, he just seems to be someone who's constantly just been put down by the overbearing father, who says, "Oh, you have to be taking part of the family business, but you're not good enough for it at the same time." It's like that sort of stereotype that Frank Langella plays in it. But like you said, I was constantly just checking my watch, going, it's really only been 20 minutes. It's really only been 40 minutes. It's felt twice as long as it actually is, and it's only, I think it's an hour and 40 minutes in total. That's a thing. Another thing that's wrong with it is the pacing's way off. The look of it is very sort of bland and normal. I think you touched on this before as well, Therese, before I watched it, that it seems almost to an extent like a Hallmark film, or something you would watch in the middle of the afternoon on Channel 5, and I definitely seen that in it, and I didn't want to see that in it, because we've just talked about the actual case itself, and there's a lot in that you can get a pretty compelling story out of, which they did eventually with the Jinx. But for me, it's just so bland and just dull and lifeless, which is very strange, especially for the supporting cast to have as well, like Kirsten Wiggs in there, and Nick Offerman, and like I said, Frank Langella was there, and obviously the two leads with Kirsten Dunst and Ryan Gosling. You see a cast like that, you're like, wow, this must be really, really good. But unfortunately, they're just so severely underused or misdirected, and it just doesn't work. But for me, I just did not like it at all, and I just found it incredibly dull. But that's my views on it. What did you think, Therese?
I think when I watched it, it was not long after rewatching the Jinx as part of this, and I suppose it was still sort of on a high from the Jinx, with knowing the story and being consumed by it for the research. That when I watched it, and my opinion after the film had ended was, as touched upon, it was like a Hallmark 215 Channel 5 movie, but I've almost felt myself going through it, knowing what was coming next and sort of being excited by it almost. I think if you were coming to the story without any knowledge of what the basis of it was, of the Jinx, you'd find it very lackluster, dull, boring, predictable, and very over-dramatized. But now, from hearing both of your opinion and even from my boyfriend's opinion as well afterward, there's really no substance to it at all. It's crazy to think that someone who directed this movie also directed The Jinx, which I think the three of us would quite wholeheartedly agree that it's something that you should watch instead. And how important it is to the case. It's strange to think that the same person directed the two, whether it was down to the production company, maybe Andy Jarecki wanted to take it a different way, make it more gritty, and it maybe just wasn't the sort of film that the film production companies wanted at the time. Who knows? Touched upon the cast. There's also Lily Rabe as well, who plays the Susan Berman character, who's brilliant. So much so that the supporting cast is a lot better than the two protagonists. I think Ryan Gosling is a great actor, and he has shown in other films that he can play the quirky weirdo. There's that film basically where he's in love with a doll. I can't remember the name of it.
Lars and the Real Girl.
Lars and the Real
That's a
Girl.
great film, yeah.
different things like that. You know, he does have the range to play that sort of out of character, not a heartthrob to what he's used to. But I think maybe a lot of it would come down to the writing. It's very evident that they couldn't ultimately have everything play by play, I would imagine. Now, I didn't read too much into this, so I'm not sure. But the fact that they changed the names, I imagine would be for the protection of Kathy McCormick's family. But for all we know, it could be a lot to do with the Durst organisation as well. You know, they might not want some film blackening their name, even though it did, because while they did change their name, the story is effectively the story of what happened. It just doesn't do the story and the victims the justice that it should. It sort of portrays Robert Durst's character in a more interesting light, rather than focusing on the victims and the effects of the things that he did. I would highly recommend The Jinx for anyone listening to this and interested in the story. It would ultimately just tell you to completely avoid the film. And I think we're all sort of on the same page. I don't know about the rest of you, but it annoys me whenever we do these podcasts and the film doesn't live up to the story. Not that the things that we're talking about are often extremely horrific, and I'm not trying to glamorize any of it, but you know, when something so serious happens, there needs to be an ounce of respect for what happened. And I just don't think the film essentially respects the story and respects the victims. But I mean, there's plenty of those films out there. It will be interesting to see how things, you know, continue with the trial. You know, are we going to get a part 2 of the Jinx documentary? Who knows? But yeah, I'm rambling now because I feel like I'm just trying to fill dead air because we can't confidently talk about the movie.
Well, that's the thing. It's very much in the tradition of the film there, Therese. You know, you just have to just keep going on and on and on. There's no ending to it. But no, I think, you know, again, I speak for all three of us. I completely agree with everything that you said. You know, I couldn't have put it any better. You know, in terms of just how much of a misfire it is ultimately. Because I think one of, you know, the fundamental problems, like you touched upon, Therese, is in its writing. It tries to sort of branch out into too many different areas. Like it, you know, is a little bit, you know, there's a little bit that touches on his relationship with his father. It hones in on it and really focuses on it, and then it just leaves it there, disappears for a lot of the film, and it goes into another aspect of his life, and it'll look at that for a good 10-20 minutes, really focus in on it, and then drop it and abandon it for something else. There's just far too much of that in the film, and it really should have just decided, you know, if it was gonna be looked at, you know, just looking at the actual case, just look at Robert in terms of his relationship with Kathy, and just use that purely as your motivation. Don't worry about, you know, him going off with his father and looking at their relationship and creating, you know, looking at that sort of melodrama, because at the end of the day, you know, it is very important that it looks at the victims of this here, and it didn't really do enough of that with Kathleen. No, it didn't really help you understand, you know, why is she with him when he's acting in this peculiar way? Why is she doing this, that, and the other? You know, it may just throw up the excuse, oh, because she loves him. But I never seen that. I never got that a sense of that, so I didn't understand that. And as well as that, you know, the Susan Berman thing's almost brushed over. Like, I think there's one separate scene which sort of shows, oh, they're friends, and that's it. Like, there's no sense of their friendship throughout at all. So when it comes to that point where she's arguing with him on the phone, you're like, but why? You know, who are you again, in the sense? You know, if you didn't know who Susan Berman was, you'd be like, why is she doing this? You know, they just had this brief moment where they had a conversation. It's probably, yeah, like I said, it's an absolute slog to get through. Have you anything else really to add to Darren? Because I'm running steam here.
Yeah, no, there's just one thing I'd like to, when I sort of was watching it and thinking about it more, and you know, if we were to compare this case with the likes of the OJ case, you know, where we're going to find out next week. Well, just reading the reports here, the jury have been sent away to make their final deliberations by the 8th or 9th of September. If that comes out that he is innocent, will we still put our hands up and say, right, it's innocent, he's innocent, it's all just been a huge coincidence, you know, he's got off with it? Or will we see that as it's a lack of evidence, or a poor trial, or just he's got lucky? You know, will we ever find him innocent? He could be 100% innocent in the whole thing. It could have just been self-defense, that he's killed and, you know, went ahead and cut a body up in an expert way and disposed of it. You know, I don't know. I've never been in that situation. Is that something you do? I don't know, but I guess with OJ as well, like he was found by a court as innocent at the time, and you know, people were still calling him the murderer, the killer, and he was never really truly found innocent. So it's sort of a similarity in that sense. And there is a real great scene, I don't know if you've watched the OJ, was it The People Against OJ Simpson or something like that, the TV show. There's a great scene at the end where you have Cuba Gooding Jr., after he gets let off with it, he just has a real, like, he's in his garden, or they're having a party, and he just stares into space, and he has that look of emotion where he one, can't believe he's got off with it, two, it gets to him that it's actually happened to his wife at the time, and you can't tell whether or not he believes he did it, or if it's just been a whole big thing. And I really think they could have went that direction with the movie. They could have had that conflicting, maybe show Ryan Gosling, giving him a benefit of the doubt, trying to prove that it was all a complete fabrication, or it was, you know, pure happenstance that he found himself in all those incidents at that time. But we don't get that. We just get a very one-dimensional, brooding Ryan Gosling wearing a very thick cardigan for the second half of the movie, and we just have to put the pieces together ourselves.
Listen, I don't think any of us are going to change our minds in the film anytime soon. None of us will want to revisit the film anytime soon. Therese, have you any further thoughts on this travesty, or you know, anything else to add?
No, I think we could probably ramble on for the rest of the night. I agree with your point, Darren. It'll be interesting to sort of see what comes out of the trial, and will he continue, you know, whether he's sentenced or let go, who knows. But I think partially for me, he's completely guilty. At the end of the day, it is in the hands of a jury. If they find him not guilty, I don't believe that he will be essentially let go. He will continue to be trialed by the media, by his peers. He may be able to walk free and, you know, go to the shop around the corner, but, you know, whether or not he'll ever really have a normal life again, who knows? But then again, at this point, we have to remember that he is from a multi-million, billion, trillion family. So he could escape to Galveston, Texas again and go into hiding. So who knows? I think we should wrap it up there, because we probably could continue to ramble. Another episode down. We
let us never speak of it again.
I'm not welcome back. I'll not. You can pick the next time I'm on. You pick the film.
Well, given your love of horror, Darren, we're gonna have to pick an extra juicy one for you next time. You know,
definitely.
We're not gonna let you pick it next time.
I'd rather watch a horror than have to watch that again. So that's grand.
There's still a big long list to go through, and there's some impressive slashers on that I know. So, we'll get you back on to redeem yourself. This is your first strike, Darren. But no, essentially, aside from the film, it's a fantastic story, and I am really glad that you picked it. It's fascinated me for years. It's one of those impressive unsolved mysteries, and you know, it's always good to sort of have a story about an eccentric man like this. And I suppose it's good to have that sort of familiarity with the trial still ongoing as well. You know, for anybody who's interested, the trial videos are being shown on YouTube. Even if you just Google a trial, you're able to find transcripts. Everything is publicly available. My only point of advice is don't watch the film, watch the Jinx. All there is to say really is thanks for joining us, Darren. It's always good to have a guest on the pod, as me and Joe always say. It gets to the point where it can get pretty boring just hearing the two of us tit for tat back and forth. Not too sure who we're going to be picking for the next episode. I think it'll just be me and Joe ourselves. So hopefully people don't switch off. As part of this is part of the BanterFlix network. So if you want to find out what else we're doing, please follow us on all socials. We're on Facebook, BanterFlix.com, Twitter and Instagram, both at BanterFlix. We're still running our Patreon at the minute. Not too sure of the different levels, but if you're interested in helping us out and donating to the whole BanterFlix network, you can find it on our website. I know coming up to the winter months, we're looking at a few more events, fingers crossed, COVID depending, with everything going on. And I know that we are in the middle of starting to review some of the shorts for the Dark Hedges Film Festival. Anything you want to plug, Darren?
No, thank you both for having me on. Really enjoyed it. I love listening to the pod and finding out, I'm one of those real true crime, pod listener, especially in the drive to work in the morning. So it's good to be part of this. I'll have to skip this one because I've been on it, but no, thank you very much. It's been great, and I'm just gotta make sure I turn my microphone off at the end of this so you don't capture me revealing some deep dark secrets whenever we finish. But yeah, seriously, go watch the Jinx, avoid all good things, and keep an eye on the news for the next week to see what happens to Mr. Durst.
Yes.
And if you ever need to go into hiding, dress as a woman.
Aye. Yeah, like he did in Galveston, I recommend Ballymena. I think you'll fit in right. You'll really fit in there, dressed as a woman, Darren. But yeah, that I think that's all we have for this evening. There's nothing else less to say, but again, thank you very much, Darren, and as always, thank you very much, Therese.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you,
the
Joe.
Research and the wonderful presenting as usual. So that's us for now. Like Therese said, we're not sure exactly where we're going to go next, but it probably will be a solo effort between us. But until then, goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.